Welcome to Deal Dynamics. This podcast is all about selling your IT and tech business. We'll tackle topics like how to sell your business and how to manage the process. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and comment on what you'd like to see in future episodes.
In this episode of Deal Dynamics, we're going to, whilst acknowledge that selling your IT or tech business is very stressful, there are ways to mitigate that stress. But first, Gary, we must acknowledge it's an incredibly stressful time for people.
Absolutely. You're doing one of the biggest transactions of your life, or possibly the biggest transaction of your life. You've probably only got one shot at it. And there's lots of unknowns that go through the whole process. And on top of that, you are a business owner who's probably had your business for between 10 and 25 years. You're the master of your destiny. And at various different parts of selling your business, you go from being the guy who's driving the car to being the front seat passenger to going into due diligence when you're sitting in the back of the car and no control. And when you don't have control, particularly as an entrepreneur, that is pretty stressful. And over and above that, you're getting asked and queried questions so many times. That's why, really, when people try to sell their businesses themselves, it's significantly more stressful, because one of the biggest things that happen between a buyer and a seller is they build trust at the beginning. But when somebody asks you 400 questions throughout due diligence about your business, and they're going further and further into them, and some of them might even be ridiculous questions like, Jack, we had a question about coffee at Starbucks for one of the due diligence. That's just going to really, really annoy shareholders.
Yeah.
So as you go through that process, you're going to have different highs and lows at the start.
I'll just come back to leap in, because Jack, there's sort of certain stress pinch points that you have identified throughout the process.
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say the core pieces where I see kind of the highest rise in stress levels is probably, number one, the initial information request is probably not going to be a list of information that you've put together before. So that can kind of contribute to a little bit of stress. We use that for the preparing of investment materials, the IM, the teaser that will go out initially to buyers. I'd say the next piece is meeting the buyer for the first time. The first conversation you have with the buyer, no matter how much prep you do for it, it's always going to be a point of stress, because you're...
Gary, we help there in the meetings with the buyers, don't we?
Yeah. For all of the meetings we do in that marketing phase, all shareholders have a full overview of who the buyers are, transactions they've done.
Some coaching from you.
Understanding exactly who they're going to be meeting, the personalities of who they're going to be meeting. And then we go through a good understanding of types of questions that they'll be asked and prepare them for that, and help with questions that they can ask as well. So they can be as relaxed as possible, because you're right, Jack, you're talking about selling your business, and here's somebody who wants to buy your business. The last thing you want to do is say the wrong thing, when in actual fact there's very little that you can say that's wrong, because it's just who your business is and who you are.
Exactly, and I think it's understanding how to frame that conversation, because until you've had one of those conversations, or until you've done some kind of prep work, until you've spoken with an advisor who's been in those conversations, you really don't, or a client tends not to understand what it takes to get through that initial buyer's meeting and really understand what they're looking for, and kind of get that follow-up meeting where you actually go into more granular detail about the business.
Yeah.
And following on from that, I would say the meeting of buyers becomes less and less stressful the more you do of it. But after that, there's the initial offer stage where you would tend to see the LOIs come in, and that can be stressful because there's a lot of legalese, understanding the offer structures. Offers are always structured differently, or there's kind of from Venture's perspective, I think we could probably help with that. Understand the different offers and how and what it actually means for you in terms of when you'll kind of receive your consideration and over what period, and what your role will be within the business during that time.
Just on that, some of what we do to help reduce that stress is work with the buyer to help them shape the
Yeah.
deal rather than
Yeah.
it comes in as a big surprise. Gary and his team will work with the buyer to say, well, that's not going to land very well. And that all helps to reduce the stress on the acquirer, on the seller.
Exactly, and when that moves into a letter of interest or a heads of terms document, we see them all the time. You guys are reviewing heads of terms with our clients all the time, helping them give a feel for what's good and bad and what's fair in these heads of terms, so that they can understand that this is just not another legal document that's going to stress them out and what they're signing their life away to. It's a non-legally binding document at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say a good buyer will be open to hearing kind of potential ways to structure the LOI and the heads of terms. A great buyer will ask, what does the seller actually want from this? And then they can kind of fit it within their parameters. Yeah. But that's always going to be a point that maybe is another kind of level to unlock and will.
And just think of them having to do that themselves. If
Exactly.
they've got to do all of this themselves, it's all great. A buyer meeting a seller and putting an offer in for a business. It's the honeymoon period. It's the dating and the courting, and everything's great. As soon as you start going into legal documentation and pushing back from a seller's point of view to a buyer's point of view.
Yeah, you need that middleman.
How comfortable are you about doing that? How comfortable are you about understanding what you should and shouldn't push back? That's where we can be that point in the middle that can take your feedback and rationalise that, whether it's positive or negative, give more feedback to help you, to give you more positive situation, and take that back to the buyer and get what you're looking for.
Yeah, and somewhat removing the emotion from that stage, because you're seeing an offer that's someone is giving you money for your baby effectively. So I think for a lot of sellers that's the case, and just to have someone that is invested and it has kind of aligned interests as you, but can remove some of the emotion from the situation and negotiate from a position of strength rather than from kind of the weakness. I think that's kind of where an advisor can really help. And then, so I suppose the buyer's LOIs, heads of terms, is probably the next stage. And once that's signed and once you're agreed, then you get into the due diligence, which is as we've spoken about in another episode, it can be very stressful. There's a lot of information that they require, and some of the information won't be something that you've even kind of gathered yourself yet. So it's something that kind of has to come out. And then understanding how to upload that into a data room, and understanding kind of that process is tricky, and there's going to be ongoing.
Presenting that information in the way the buyer wants,
exactly,
which is just completely alien to someone who's never done it before.
I think from a seller's point of view, they've got to be mindful, and they may not think about it in this way, but the buyer's usually going out and paying for an external financial due diligence company, a tax due diligence company, or a legal due diligence company to really dig into the business. Hence the reason why there's so many questions and questions upon questions as well. And it's from a seller's point of view, all those questions can lead to a real frustration that this is just never ending, and possibly at times it can feel like there's a lack of trust from the buyer because it's asking so many questions. But really, it's just an external company who's paid a lot of money to dig into the deep detail and find as much out about the company and make sure there's no red flags. Which is why initially when you do the review, we try to mitigate against that.
Yeah, and even just having someone to tell you it's coming is like it does somewhat strip you. In the process, they're trying to find everything out, and I think having someone who in your corner, and also someone who knows what's going to happen and can say, just prepare for this. This is a stressful part of the process. And then you
drive the timeline. You know,
drive the timeline.
It can be very stressful that these things come on you.
Yeah,
we would look to say, come on, we need to bring this forward now to the acquirer,
Yeah.
so it's not going to cause a lot of stress to who's going to have to create a lot of information in 1 or 2 days. Particularly when we get onto the equity bridge, that if it's left to the last minute is really incredibly stressful and can stymie a lot of deals. We like to be working on it in the background and then bring it forward.
Exactly.
So to reduce that stress level.
Yeah, and kind of the ongoing negotiation in the background of due diligence. But I think the final point that's probably really, really key is actually running your business while all of this is going on.
Yeah.
And kind of navigating the everyday ups and downs of running a business and being at the head of a business, which is naturally just going to, in my view, double the kind of stress levels that a seller would be experiencing.
Do you think that somebody can do, an advisor can do due diligence, pre-sales, and 100% mitigate against everything that can go wrong?
No, it's just not possible.
There'll always be something.
There'll always be something that.
Give me an
comes up.
example of something that
Well, one recent example, well, not particularly recent, but one notable example is a conflict of interest between a company, their major client, and the acquirer's accountant. It was a conflict of interest. You would never have even cropped up with any other buyer. It came up with this buyer, and it delayed the process by a couple of weeks while we flew out to America to
I remember that.
negotiate. And so pre-preparation's fine, but you can never, mitigate every potential issue.
A very stressful situation. I remember when we got the call from the acquirer to say that, sorry,
Yeah.
this is what's going on. And it only happened with this one acquirer. It's just a one-off situation.
Get on the red eye.
And the deal was dead. After 6 months, the deal was dead at that point. But we found a way through it, and we got to a conclusion that worked for buyer and seller, and a week later the deal's done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think in part the reason why there's always something that comes up that maybe wasn't anticipated in preparation is because there's typically a 6-month period that this is going on for, and sometimes longer. So in that period, there's going to be a lot of changes just from an economic perspective. If there's a change in policy for the better or worse, it affects the deal, and it affects and overall financial performance of the business. If you're growing during the period of time that you're looking to sell, that can influence things as well.
And the buyer as well.
Exactly.
You could sell to one buyer which is very specific about something, but another buyer wouldn't. We had that same example as well, where one buyer looked at some contracts which they felt for their customers wouldn't be suitable, and would all have to be redone. And another buyer looked at the exact same contracts and said, there's no problem with them, we're happy with them.
Yeah.
Imagine us as advisors saying at the very beginning of that process that your contracts aren't going to be suitable and they have to go and redo all these contracts.
When
There was no need to do them at all.
Yeah. No, well, I think that summarises it nicely, guys, and hopefully give our listeners a bit of insight that it's stressful, but it doesn't need to be too stressful.
Working with us, we will navigate a lot of those stresses and mediate the buyer's frustrations and your frustrations to make sure that the transaction stays on track and gets done.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Dynamics podcast with your hosts, Gary Smith, Stephen Taylor, and Jack Chiappi. Please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and comment on what topics you want us to discuss. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, as we provide insights, reports, deals, events, trends, and more. Just head to venturecorporatefinance.com/newsletter to sign up for free. The link is also in the description. That's all for now, folks. See you next week.